Extra, extra, tell all about it. It's Dave's Big Dictionary. As you saw about 2.5 hours ago, my darling and adorable wife went into this book right here, and here's actually the bookworm that goes with it. So you have to watch the first part of the show to know what I'm talking about. But she went into this dictionary of 75,000 plus definitions, ran her finger through it, and came up with the word at random that she came up with, the word mill, M-I-L-L. Let me read it for you. In the noun form, a building with machinery for grinding grain into flour, a machine used in processing, as by grinding, stamping, cutting, or finishing raw material, factory, and then there's another noun form, 1/10 of a cent, blah, blah, blah. This is the verb form, of course, to process in a mill, and to move in a circle or in an eddying mass. So I had to think, what am I going to do with that word? A lot of things came to mind. First of all, the first phrase that came into mind was Monty Python's sketch of trouble at the mill. One of our sleigh rods got askew on treadle, or whatever Graham Chapman says, and that cues in the Spanish Inquisition to come in. But I don't really have anything to say about that. And Mill, we actually live very near a fellow named Mill, a wonderful person whom we're proud to have as a neighbor, but nothing much to say about that. What I did want to talk about is I want to talk about Mill Road. Mill Road, which is very close to where I lived when I was living on Long Island for a great chunk of my life, long before I moved to Colorado. So when my wife and I got married and bought a house, we literally were 1 block away from Mill Road, which is a fairly trafficy street. Not much to say about that either. So I want to roll it back a little more and talk about mills and Mill Road in the sense of when I first moved to Long Island with Mom and Dad, when we were getting out of Brooklyn. We lived in Brooklyn, New York until I was 12 and a half years old. And I had a decent life. We had an apartment and Jewish neighborhood, and I went to Hebrew school and all that sort of thing. But the neighborhood was changing, and our family, a lot of them were moving to Long Island, and they were saying, hey, why are you still staying in Flatbush Avenue, Ocean Parkway? Why are you there with all the traffic? And, there's crime happening now and stuff, and you're in an apartment. Go, stop flushing your money down the drain, paying a landlord rent. Come to Long Island. There's trees, there's yards, there's quiet, and you buy a house and you pay, you still pay rent, but it comes back to you. You own the thing that you're buying. What the hell are you waiting for? So finally, we decided, okay, maybe it's time, and we'll commute and we'll do it. So we bought, Mom and Dad got a house on Long Island, in Hewlett, Long Island. Nice, picturesque little 3-bedroom yellow house with a sweet little front yard, a reasonable backyard. And this was not news to me. Never conceived of this, never thought of this, because I'm New York born, Brooklyn born, apartment, Ocean Parkway, traffic back and forth, 3 lanes each way, etc. And then coming out to what to me was almost country, even though it was suburbia. And it was a more countrified suburbia back then. But I'll remember, and the one thing I'll never forget that made me think of Mill and Mill Road was coming there the first time. And I don't know if it was still when we were first looking for houses or that time when we first came and drove there, after moving. And we're coming down Broadway, and not Broadway in Manhattan, but Broadway in Hewlett, Long Island. And it was still quieter back then in the evening. And you had stores there, not as many as there are now, but kind of looking around and seeing stores and seeing shops, but also seeing a lot of open space, not in the way that Brooklyn looked or Manhattan looked when I had been there, but lawns and suburbia and a kind of openness that was intriguing to me and new to me and a little bit scary, but also quite wonderful. And I just remember coming down towards my old house where my folks still live, and on the right, seeing this red building this kind of wooden, properly appointed, but it looked like no building I had ever seen in New York, intentionally. And it was a commercial structure. This was, I swear to you, this is the nutty kind of New York kid that I was. It was something called a dairy barn. Now, I'm not talking about an actual barn with cows and dairy equipment and things. This was a store. It was the country suburban equivalent of a 7-Eleven, is all it really was. But here it was, open late into the night when, well, in the evening, when other things were closed, and you could go there and get milk, eggs, bread, some ice cream, some essentials if you want. And the look of it, because it had like a red smokestack kind of a look to it, and a barn configuration, almost like a barn or a mill. And I looked up that, of all things that I would end up seeing or looking at on Long Island, and that was that first moment when I knew, in a good way, that things were going to get better, that my life was going to be better living here rather than living in an apartment in Brooklyn. I don't know why that dairy barn, which is still there, I think they call it Dairy House or something, it was taken over by a new company, still looks basically the same. Red barn, white lettering, dairy barn. Just across the road would be Mill Road. So yeah, I'm kind of jumping from Mill to Broadway and Dairy Barn, but I wish I could explain it a little better. But this idea of that there was this quaint, sweet-looking, country-ish store that was also open late, up until about 11 or 12 o'clock at night. So if you were in a place, because we were from Manhattan and Brooklyn, and everything was open all the time, and you could always get something on Church Avenue and shop and etc. And here we were, we didn't know. We was like, well, God, how far is the nearest supermarket, and how far is this and that? I mean, they were all half a mile away. Still, we knew that I could walk 4 blocks and go to the dairy barn just in case we were starving. If suddenly there was a horrible storm and and took out all the power, and there was nothing working in the fridge, and everything had spoiled, and we were lying on the floor like babies from Ethiopia, dying for food, I could put on my mucklucks and trudge 4 blocks, and there would be a store, a quaint, beautiful, old Andy Griffith kind of looking store, with bread and staples and fruit, and some vegetables in there, and I could get them, and we would live and survive because of the dairy barn. And it was sort of a beacon. It was also, if you're driving along, it was easy to see, so you knew around where you had to make the turn to get to our house. So that, I have to say, is the first of many good memories of Long Island living. And yeah, it kind of looked like a barn, but it also looked like a mill. So that's how I can make that part of Dave's Big Dictionary today. And I guess I can throw in one more pun. It's not one of the wretched puns of destiny, but since we talked about A Cow for Hansel being a somewhat religious book, Exodus was a religious book for a Hollywood filmmaker of some note, the guy who made the 10 Commandments. As a matter of fact, Exodus was grist for DeMille,